Back in 2017, specifically in Marrakech, a case happened that caused a massive stir across all of Morocco and even in Europe. A case that was genuinely shocking, one nobody saw coming. What was about to happen that night? Two young guys were renting a room at a hotel in Marrakech. At first, when they checked in and paid, everything seemed completely normal, just like any other guests at that hotel. They seemed relaxed, smiling, going out and coming back to rest a bit before heading out again. But you need to know exactly why they kept going out. Nobody knew what they were actually looking for, why they picked that specific area, why they picked that specific hotel, why they picked Marrakech specifically. What were they doing? Going out every single day without ever getting tired or bored. Imagine. They actually found what they were looking for. But what exactly happened, and why did the hotel receptionist get so suspicious about something he noticed? I'll tell you exactly why he got suspicious and what tipped him off, because those same two guys, when they came back to the hotel the second or third night, showed up visibly shaking. You could see it on their faces. There was a strong smell coming off them. The smell of gasoline burning, something scorched. The receptionist definitely picked up on it, but he didn't let it show. God only knows what exactly triggered his suspicion. Maybe he'd already connected the dots himself. I'll explain the details coming up. The receptionist actually happened to be at his shop later when news broke about what had happened that night. And that news is exactly what made him panic and immediately report it to the police. That's when investigators discovered what those two guys had actually burned and why they burned it. That's where the real shock of this case begins. Today's case is shocking in every sense of the word. You could consider it one of the most serious cases in modern Moroccan history. Before we start, I want to mention that some of you might have already heard about this case before, since it did cause a huge stir, as I mentioned. But in this episode, you're going to get even the smallest details that played a huge role in everything that happened next. Kind of like that dangerous operation that happened at Hadrama, carried out by Moroccan individuals. Do you want to know how they carried out that operation? Do you want to know what exactly happened that night at Hadrama and how one guy managed to save a girl at the very last second? And what was the reason certain people specifically targeted La Crème Café in Marrakech and kept watching it? What was the reason that would eventually give one man a genuine phobia of the Dutch language to the point that if he ever wanted to hire someone for his businesses, he wouldn't ask about French, English degrees, experience, or anything like that? His O&LY requirement was that the employee simply be aware of and recognize the Dutch language, not necessarily speak it fluently, not necessarily understand it, just be able to recognize that a language being spoken was Dutch. Wherever they heard someone speaking it, they had to report it to their boss immediately. In exchange, he paid extremely well, way more than a normal security guard, receptionist, or accountant would make. Because this person we're talking about was actually an important businessman in Morocco with major projects even in Europe. But the second he heard even a single word of Dutch being spoken nearby, he'd freeze up completely. I'll explain exactly why in the details coming up. One more question remains: who exactly tipped off the customs officer, and why, and what did he do? There are a lot of questions we're going to answer in this case. Without dragging this out any further, let's dive straight into the details. We start with a young man who was diligent in his studies, full of ambition. His dream was to become a doctor. He was just months away from achieving that dream. One day, needing a break from exam stress, he went with his friend to a cafe that was known locally as La Crème Café. The poor guy had no idea what fate awaited him and his friend at that exact cafe, at that exact table where they sat down, because just minutes after they sat down, Two unidentified individuals wearing helmets showed up riding a TMX scooter and opened fire directly at their table. The bullet hit him directly and he died instantly. May God rest his soul and give strength to his family. It was truly devastating. Unfortunately, a stray bullet also hit his friend sitting next to him, and another bullet hit the girl who was with them. The friend took a bullet to his thigh, while the girl was hit directly in the stomach. She nearly died right there on the spot. But according to sources, thankfully, a young man happened to be nearby and immediately administered first aid, managing to stop her bleeding until the ambulance arrived. The doctor later confirmed that if that young man hadn't intervened on the scene, the girl would have died from blood loss. Huge respect to him for that heroic act. Some sources say he actually knew them personally, was studying pharmacy, and had solid first aid knowledge. Police immediately launched an investigation. Ambulances arrived quickly, and the girl was rushed to the hospital, where after a complicated surgery, she survived by the skin of her teeth. Unfortunately, though, they discovered that the friend who was shot in the thigh had actually died instantly from his wound too. May God rest his soul. So basically, the young man they'd been targeting took multiple direct hits. Forensic and technical police teams arrived on scene, along with security and intelligence services. Since a case like this feels like something out of a movie, extremely rare and difficult to imagine happening in Morocco, especially considering firearms are practically non-existent here, the entire neighborhood was immediately locked down, nobody in, nobody out. Backup units and anti-crime task forces arrived, cordoning off the crime scene with tape to prevent contamination, since a crowd had already gathered, filming everything on their phones. Investigators combed the scene thoroughly, marked evidence with numbered markers, collected shell casings in small plastic evidence bags to later identify the exact type of weapon used. They also lifted fingerprints, though the perpetrators clearly seemed to have taken precautions. Witnesses confirmed they'd apparently sprayed something on the chairs and tables where they'd been sitting. According to the evidence, the two shooters had actually been sitting there roughly 15 minutes before the shooting happened, meaning they'd likely been surveilling the location to confirm their target. Investigators lifted fingerprints from the tables and every surface possible. Ballistics specialists also arrived to determine the trajectory of the bullets. Intelligence agencies got involved too, including Morocco's General Directorate for Territorial Surveillance, DGST, and the Central Bureau of Judicial Investigations, CIJ, essentially the FBI equivalent. Investigators also collected surveillance footage from the cafe's own cameras, nearby hotel cameras, and street cameras throughout the area. What they found footage confirming two individuals had arrived on a TMX scooter exactly as witnesses had described. This footage was crucial, providing precise details about the culprits, the shooters, nothing more, nothing less. Meanwhile, intelligence services tracked phone signals active in that area during the time of the shooting, checking for any foreign or suspicious numbers that had been in contact with each other. At the same time, security was placed around the hospitals where the injured survivors were being treated, since the case remained mysterious and the motive was still completely unknown. Hence the heightened security, in case the perpetrators tried to finish off the survivors if they discovered they were still alive. While forensic teams were still combing through the cafe, a report came in about smoke and fire spotted in an empty lot behind a swimming pool nearby. Units rushed to the scene, and what did they find? The TMX scooter completely burned, along with a firearm that had also been set on fire. The whole area was thick with smoke and a strong smell of gasoline, clearly signaling that the two perpetrators had gone out of their way to destroy every possible piece of evidence, hoping to escape without a trace. But no such luck. Turns out you can run, but you can't hide. Investigators, despite the fire damage, managed to preserve enough of the weapon using technical methods to trace a serial number. And get this, they even confirmed the scooter was actually stolen and managed to identify the exact type of firearm used, which turned out to be smuggled in from abroad. So the big question at this point was, who exactly were these two individuals who arrived on the TMX, and why did they specifically target this young man? Why were they so focused on that exact table? This question left both police and the public completely baffled. Why would anyone target a young man who was clearly far removed from any trouble? Someone in the prime of his life, focused entirely on his studies and future. And why did his friend and the girl who were sitting with him also get caught in the crossfire? When police conducted their investigation, they confirmed these young people had absolutely nothing shady going on. No gang affiliations, no criminal connections, nothing. They were simply students, never filed complaints against anyone, had no enemies or unsettled scores. All in their 20s, hardworking students, completely clean records. Before diving deeper into details, this case occurred on November 17, 2017, and its developments would continue all the way until 2024 and beyond. So what actually happened once the two perpetrators completed the hit and burned the weapon? They headed back to the hotel where they were staying, and that's exactly when the receptionist noticed how visibly stressed they were. The smell of gasoline, their disheveled hair, just like I mentioned earlier, suspicion crept in immediately, and he quickly connected it to the shooting that had just occurred at Crème Café, since the hotel was actually very close to the crime scene, especially once he heard about two tall individuals wearing helmets being involved. That's when suspicion turned into certainty, and he decided to report it to police. Sure enough, these two matched the description, tall guys with long hair. At the same time, they'd gone in and out, changed clothes, tried to blend in like nothing happened, thinking nobody had noticed them. But they'd forgotten. When they were riding the TMX with their helmets on, their long ponytails were clearly visible sticking out from under the helmets, easily seen by witnesses and captured on camera. It was clear the whole plan revolved entirely around hiding their faces and destroying evidence, but that's exactly what gave them away. Police arrived, arrested them right there at the hotel. No resistance, thinking their plan was foolproof and they'd be flying out of Morocco the next day anyway. Police handcuffed them and took them in for questioning. Initially, they completely denied everything, claiming they were just tourists exploring the city, having nothing to do with the shooting, insisting the smell of gasoline on their clothes was purely coincidental. But once investigators confronted them directly with hard evidence, that's when the shocking confession came out. So, who exactly were these two individuals? Turns out they were Dutch nationals. They'd actually met each other while serving prison sentences. One was locked up for smuggling something under threat, and the other was also convicted on smuggling related charges. That's where their friendship began, and it turned out they were remarkably alike in mentality and personality. Money, fame, all of that stuff mattered to them equally. Basically, capable of doing anything for the right price. They stayed close friends even after finishing their sentences, continuing to work together on smuggling operations, splitting profits, sometimes smuggling from a shop, sometimes from a house, sometimes hitting a completely new target each time. But despite all this, they weren't fully satisfied with these smaller smuggling gigs. The amounts weren't big enough for the risks they were taking. And they knew that eventually, doing this repeatedly, they'd eventually get caught again over relatively small amounts. That fear pushed them to think bigger. How could they pull off one truly massive score? Chasing daytime cash just wasn't cutting it anymore. They wanted quick, cold, hard cash. So what did they decide to do? They started taking on serious jobs specifically for organized crime groups. They actually signed up on a specialized website You know the type, dedicated to shady dealings, assassinations, disappearances, that sort of thing. You guys probably know the name commonly referred to as the dark web. I won't get too deep into details, just giving you a general picture here. That's where they posted their services, advertising themselves as professionals skilled in every type of smuggling, home, shops, cars, and stated they could even carry out assassination jobs, but at a higher price. They built up their profile, made themselves look credible, and naturally, since they were active on that platform, it meant there was definitely a market. Plenty of people out there with scores to settle who wanted it done discreetly without directly getting their own hands dirty. They needed hired guns, and that's exactly the profile these two had built for themselves. Sure enough, it wasn't long before a message came through Froome from someone looking to hire them. You guys probably already know that whole underground world is filled with cartel members and smugglers, a world where the strong prey on the weak. That's exactly how they started connecting with major criminal networks across Europe, specifically in Holland and Belgium. Sometimes someone would hire them to kidnap a person and they'd handle it and get paid. Other times, they'd be hired to eliminate someone entirely. Basically, whatever job came their way, they'd execute it and collect their payment. Now, we've reached the most important question. What exactly were they doing in Marrakech, who hired them? And what was the actual job they were tasked with? And why did that poor, innocent young man, who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, end up paying with his life? According to their official confession, they admitted they had actually made a critical error in identifying their target. They stated they'd been hired by the leader of a criminal organization who specifically instructed them to eliminate the owner of La Crème Café. He provided them with a photo of the cafe owner, and they'd rented a hotel nearby to keep him under surveillance, confirming he was indeed the one running the cafe. Once confirmed, they moved quickly, put on their helmets, retrieved their weapon, and executed the hit directly outside the cafe, believing they'd successfully eliminated their intended target. They never expected that by the time they returned with the weapon, the actual cafe owner had already gotten up from his seat, and the young student had unknowingly taken his place at that exact table. The young man who ultimately paid with his life for a mistake that had nothing to do with him. When police asked why they'd also shot the girl and the young man's friend, they explained they hadn't specifically targeted them. They were simply seated too close to the intended target, and once gunfire erupted, everyone panicked and ran, resulting in stray, unintended hits fired hastily and chaotically in the chaos. Eventually, investigators discovered the shooters themselves realized their catastrophic mistake. They broke down completely during questioning, expressing deep, genuine remorse. We are extremely, deeply regretful. They confirmed their sole target, sent from Holland specifically, was the owner of La Crème Café. Investigators pressed them further. Why exactly did they want him eliminated? Their answer was genuinely shocking. They revealed this whole case stemmed from a massive, long-standing rivalry, and that the person who hired them for this hit was actually a major figure within the notorious Macro Mafia network, someone who had been hunting down and searching for this cafe owner since 2012, unable to locate him until recently when he finally offered them a substantial payment to eliminate him once and for all. Investigators uncovered another shocking detail. The person who ordered the hit was personally none other than a notorious drug baron named Redouane. This naturally raises the question, what exactly had the cafe owner done to earn such intense personal hatred from Redouane to the point where he'd send hired assassins after him, even having the weapon specifically smuggled into Morocco for the job? As I mentioned, Redouane had specifically arranged and funded the entire operation, the weapon, the getaway scooter, everything ensuring they had absolutely everything they needed once they arrived in Morocco. All they had to do was carry out the hit and immediately flee back to Holland. But they overlooked several critical details, believing they were completely covered, though, as we already know, they were eventually caught regardless. So, back to our main question, what exactly did the cafe owner do that made Ridouane so furious? Hunting him down relentlessly for years? Turns out, Ridouane's drug supply chain relied on smuggling routes passing through a major, crucial Belgian port. He had certain people bribed there, ensuring his product moved through customs without issues. However, it turned out he had a serious rival, a large, established, heavyweight smuggling network deeply entrenched in international trafficking. Among the key players in this rival group was, you guessed it, the cafe owner himself, known within these criminal circles by the nickname Le Miss. Let me break down exactly what triggered this entire conflict. The main reason Ridouane ordered these hitmen to eliminate Miss, the cafe owner, was pure, blind revenge over a massive smuggling operation gone wrong, a serious challenge and direct hit against Ridouane's reputation. This case wasn't just some ordinary dispute, it involved deep, serious rivalries between major drug barons. Back in 2012, Lemis and his network successfully intercepted and stole an enormous shipment of premium quality drugs belonging to Ridouane. Not just any product, but one of the most valuable and potent types available, and the quantity involved was massive. Lemis orchestrated this cleverly, right in the middle of a major Belgian port, timing it perfectly before Ridouane's shipment even arrived. He manipulated serial numbers and customs records, making it appear as though customs authorities themselves had seized Ridouane's shipment. Meanwhile, Lemis had already secured a corrupt, high-ranking customs official on his payroll monthly, ensuring Ridouane would immediately assume this official was the one who tipped off customs about his shipment, leading to its seizure. This convinced Ridouane to have that innocent customs official eliminated, believing he was the one responsible for the leak. But that official had actually done absolutely nothing wrong, completely innocent. This fueled Ridouane's fury even further, especially once he eventually discovered, after his product mysteriously started appearing for sale in the Dutch drug market, that it had actually been stolen, not legitimately seized by customs at all. Realizing he'd wrongly executed an innocent, valuable connection within customs based on false information, Ridouane became consumed with rage and vengeance. He dug deeper and eventually uncovered undeniable proof that Lemis, the cafe owner, was the true mastermind behind the entire elaborate scheme. At that time, Lemis hadn't yet established his cafe. That came later. But to be clear, Ridouane's anger wasn't really about the financial loss itself. For someone in his position, controlling one of the most powerful and feared drug networks across Holland, Belgium, and much of Western Europe, what mattered far more was his reputation and authority. As I've mentioned before in previous episodes, drug lords like Ridouane consider themselves untouchable kings within their criminal empire, and having someone successfully outsmart and steal from him represented an unforgivable insult, a direct challenge to his authority and dominance. This humiliation is exactly what ignited Ridouane's relentless thirst for revenge. He deployed his network and intelligence resources, eventually receiving confirmation that Lemis had fled to Morocco, settling comfortably and successfully in Marrakech, opening a luxurious, upscale cafe named, fittingly, La Crème, funded entirely using the wealth and expertise gained from that very shipment he'd stolen from Ridouane years earlier. That's essentially the full backstory leading up to Ridouane's final decision, ordering his hired guns to eliminate the cafe owner once located. Ridouane's private assassination unit was infamously nicknamed Angels of Death. Anyone targeted by this unit was essentially considered already dead the moment their name came up. The clear instructions given to the hitman were to eliminate the cafe owner, specifically inside his own cafe, sending an unmistakable message throughout Europe's criminal underworld. Anyone daring to steal from Redouane would face deadly consequences, no matter where in the world they tried to hide. It's important to clarify, Redouane's organization was considered one of the most powerful and feared criminal networks, dominating not just Holland and Belgium, but significant portions of Western Europe's drug trade. However, his biggest and most dangerous rival network was precisely the one Lemis, the cafe owner, was affiliated with. But wait, why exactly did Lemis suddenly flee Morocco right after this shooting occurred? Had he somehow sensed the danger and fled preemptively, realizing Redouane was closing in on him? Let me quickly explain the bigger picture. Lemis and the cafe were merely part of a larger smuggling operation, but who exactly handled distributing that stolen product once it hit the European market? This is where another key player enters the story. Abdelkader, part of the same criminal network as Lemis, responsible specifically for storing and distributing the stolen product across European markets. Eventually, police and security forces coordinated closely together, successfully raiding a hotel in a European city, catching Abdelkader red-handed with roughly 500 kilograms of premium quality drugs, a portion of that very shipment originally stolen from Redouane years earlier by Lemis. This arrest made major headlines across European media. Redouane's network immediately suspected Abdelkader was the one responsible for storing their stolen product, and they spared no effort trying to track him down for revenge. But they couldn't quite pinpoint his location, forcing them to maintain constant surveillance, waiting patiently for their opportunity. Eventually, the day came when Abdelkader was released from custody, though I'll keep this part brief since Abdelkader actually received a relatively lenient sentence, released back in 2014, but shortly after his release, he was fatally shot in Belgium, clear retaliation from Redouane's network. This news reached Lemis almost immediately, terrifying him profoundly, realizing he could easily be next. This fear is precisely what drove Lemis to instruct his own employees strictly report immediately if anyone around them ever spoke Dutch or any closely related language, since he knew Redouane's people would eventually track him down and he needed every possible warning sign. Sure enough, that fateful day arrived. Lemis was sitting comfortably at his cafe when his security guard rushed over, warning him urgently that two individuals nearby were speaking Dutch. Panicked immediately, Lemis fled his cafe in a rush, jumping into his car and speeding away just moments before the hitman arrived, leaving the innocent young student unknowingly seated at his usual table to tragically pay the ultimate price meant for Lemis himself. As I mentioned earlier, the young man's friend and the girl were unintentionally caught in the crossfire simply because they were sitting too close by. Once the two hitmen spotted Lemis's photo matching a man they believed was seated there, they assumed they'd successfully completed their mission and immediately fled back toward Holland, unaware they'd actually killed an innocent bystander. Instead, following their confessions, their trial proceeded, lasting quite a long time. As for Lemis himself, police continued searching relentlessly until eventually locating him hiding out in another Moroccan city. He was arrested, questioned extensively, and after a lengthy trial process was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in prison for international drug trafficking related charges, with all his assets and properties seized entirely, proving once again that money obtained illegally rarely brings lasting stability, often vanishing just as quickly as it arrived. As for Redouane himself, he was eventually arrested in Dubai back in 2019, extradited to Dutch authorities, where investigators uncovered crucial evidence directly linking him to the shooting that occurred at the Crème Café in Marrakech. Dutch authorities immediately shared this critical evidence with Moroccan police. Now, what happened in 2024? The case was reopened during the appeals process at Marrakech's criminal court in July 2024. The court's final ruling overturned the original death penalty verdict against the two shooters, replacing it instead with life imprisonment. Their defense lawyer successfully argued there had been a tragic case of mistaken identity, confirming clearly that the young student was killed unintentionally and that Limis himself was indeed the intended target all along. The lawyer emphasized that both defendants showed genuine, profound remorse. Both were seen crying openly in court, formally apologizing to the deceased student's grieving family, acknowledging the immense psychological trauma their tragic mistake had caused an entirely innocent young man to lose his life. The defense successfully convinced the court that both defendants had fully cooperated with Moroccan authorities throughout the investigation, providing valuable information that helped uncover several other significant criminal connections. The lawyer emphasized clearly that neither defendant ever intended random violence. Their sole target had always been Limis exclusively. The defense attorney continues pushing further even now, following this 2024 ruling reducing their sentence from death to life imprisonment, currently advocating for their extradition back to Holland, arguing they should serve the remainder of their sentence there instead, given they're Dutch citizens with families still residing in Amsterdam. And that's where today's case concludes. So, did you guys enjoy cases like this? Should we step away from typical assassination stories for a bit? Enough elimination? Cases for now. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and I'll definitely search for more compelling stories like this one to bring you next. See you all in another episode, another case, God willing. Please leave a nice comment down below. Hit subscribe. Share this video. Let's have a laugh together. God ease your path, and may God light your way. Love you all for the sake of God. Take care of yourselves.